Good morning. Can we get started this morning, please? I have apologies for Councillors Baxter, Montgomery, Russell, Bennett and DeVink. Are there any other apologies? Thank you. Order of business, you'll see a new education or more updated and corrected education performance report tabled in front of us. So we're happy to take the corrected or updated version. I think so, Mary, is that right? Or corrected version? Yeah. Are we happy to take that and replace the one that we have? Okay, and I'm sure Mary will throw more light on the corrections once we get to them. Is there any declarations of interest? None. Okay, if we move on to item 4, performance reports, health and social care, adult social care. Awesome.
Thank you, Chair. We'll just take you through a couple of the highlights on the report today. As a couple of you are aware, the new integration board met for the first time on the 20th of August. That's moving ahead quite well. There is a programme of organisational development which is being delivered for IJB members to ensure that people are well aware of all of the services that are being managed as part of that and some of the roles and remits that they need to take place. That's been particularly helpful, I think, for some of our NHS colleagues who are on the board who maybe are less familiar with some of the Middle Lothian population and the Middle Lothian resources. So it's been quite a positive resource for them to do that. And we've been doing some themed topics as well. So where there's been big decisions coming up, we recently had a visit to Cherry Road to talk about the learning disability services, so that when the paper came to the next board that was discussing learning disability services, it was much easier for the board members to make decisions around that. Substance misuse, we're really looking at moving towards developing a recovery hub. So it's about making that shift between just treating people at the point that they're first identifying that and about how we support people to maintain their recovery. And there's a lot of work, some of you will obviously be familiar with the recovery cafes and the recovery college that are based within Dalkeith. And there's more work that's going on around that. So we're looking at finding resources and building to very specifically have a recovery hub within Mid Lothian. There's also an awful lot of work going on around developing the peer support. It becomes really clear, particularly in recovery, that having people who've experienced and are part of that recovery journey themselves is really helpful for people who are just entering that recovery journey. And part of that has been about having a peer support worker that's based within one of our GP practices within the Bonnyrigg area. And that's been a real benefit for them in terms of necessarily, so people are getting support as soon as they're going to their GP practice, and that's been seen really positively, and we will look at whether or not that's something we need to roll out across Mid Lothian. Older People's Services, we're in the process of pulling together information to update our older people's strategy at this point in time. There's been a lot of work going on around day services, particularly around what people are looking for, how that links in with our local area coordination service. And we've had a couple of consultation events with older people to pull some of that information together. And we're in the process of doing some co-design meetings now, so that will be ready for early into the new year. Mental health, I'm actually focusing on dual diagnosis, which goes back to the substance misuse. There are lots of people who we work with who the mental health service might work with and substance misuse service might work with. We've been pulling together some meetings to have a far more coordinated approach around this group, looking at how we can actually share some of those resources amongst staff. So there's some health check clinics, there are other sorts of services that we can offer to that group and work in a more joined up way around that. Making sure that really people don't slip through the cracks between these services. One of the benefits for this is that the adult concern forms, and these are the forms that we get from the police who maybe come into contact with people evenings and weekends, have actually significantly reduced since we started doing this piece of work for this particular client group. So there's obviously some benefits to that more joined up working across health and social care in this field. Learning disabilities, we're pushing ahead with the development work for the 12-person unit that will be being built in Pennycook. We're identifying the individuals who will be moving into that and doing work around that, and the tender for the build is due to go out early next week, so that will be pressing ahead in that. There's been a lot of work going on around the development of that project. And ensuring that we've got the right supported living opportunities available for people within Mid Lothian with complex support care needs. Self-directed support, there's been a reasonable focus within that, and that does go across both children's services and adult services, and there's been a real focus on embedding the personal outcomes approach to the assessment work that we're doing across adults and children's services to ensure that we're getting it right. It's about the quality of the conversations that we're having with people. There's also been a lot of work in developing some of the more detailed policies around it and about how we set budgets and how we share some of that information with individuals. So it really does feel as though that's bedding in well across the piece. And certainly, I know this isn't the children's services element, but there's some really, I think we're ahead of the game across Scotland with some of the work that's happening in children's services and self-directed support. And I suppose I'm speaking about that as the lead for the self-directed support across both areas. But Joan and her service have really taken on board that, and there's been a lot of really positive work that's been going on. With regard to some of the quality services, one of the challenges, we do have an LSI, large-scale investigation that's currently going on around a residential service for adults with learning disabilities, which is based in Dalkeith. There have been some fairly significant challenges around that, and we're currently looking at bringing in another provider to provide care and support for those 12 individuals has been the decision of that meeting. And we've been working in partnership with the current provider, the new provider and the Care Inspectorate to make that as smooth a transition as we possibly can for those individuals. But happy to take questions, Chair.
Questions, comments? Kenny, then Brian.
Thanks for that. It was just on the substance misuse work. I was interested to know whether we are seeing an impact of the use of legal highs in that work, and whether we have found a way to respond, if indeed that would be different from conventional drug misuse.
Take that one, Councillor. Certainly, in terms of recent weeks, we've seen the developments in the city in terms of the forfeiture orders that have been carried through by trading standards there. That's police-led operation, and indeed that's the same situation here in terms of our consideration of using something similar. But certainly in the past few weeks, we've been working across East and Mid Lothian, because it's one of our shared services through trading standards, to ensure that those premises which have been supplying legal highs have been targeted in terms of the, I forget the name of the actual brand of the substance, but that those have been seized in the past few weeks, and indeed we understand that from follow-up visits nothing is now on display. I can't guarantee it's not being supplied, but there's certainly nothing on display, and we continue to work collaboratively with the police, and of course there's legislation due in round about April. It's anticipated to come through to ban those substances.
Are you happy with that, Ken?
Yeah, I think that's great. Just though, in terms of working with clients, it might be that we don't have any of that information coming through, but I was just curious as to whether we were seeing people who were suffering misuse problems as a result, and whether we had to target a particular way of working to help those clients. That was always interesting. But thank you, Kevin, because that is also useful to know.
I mean, I think a lot of it has been around some of the learning and development for staff in terms of where we're going with that. There have been challenges, I think, in some of our children's services particularly, and it's about how we've been able to work alongside staff in terms of them having the right approach around that. It has particularly been a challenge and has resulted in it's been one of the contributing factors where we have needed to sign children into secure accommodation. Not the only factor, but it has been a contributing factor for a number of the children that we're facing more challenges in terms of how we support them to remain within Mid Lothian. MELDAP, as the strategic body, is taking a lead, working very closely, looking at what learning and development opportunities, but I suppose often the way that we work with that is very similar to the way we work with drug and alcohol services across the piece, but it's about ensuring that staff feel knowledgeable around that kind of area. Certainly one of the areas that for staff we've been very much, this is going to sound crazy, to move away from the phrase legal highs and to use NPS on new psychoactive substances, because I think there's been a sense that the term legal makes people think that it's safe. So there has been a shift, particularly professionally, for us to try and avoid some of that phrasing, just to ensure that we kind of get that message out that it's more around that psychoactive substance element of it rather than the legal highs kind of has a danger of making young people think that it's a safe thing for them to try.
I shall take your advice on my phraseology.
Just before we leave that subject, Alison, it is just about trying to get, how are we coping with, call them whatever you want, legal highs or whatever. I happened to notice yesterday I think it was the Chief Inspector of Prisons in England and Wales stating that it was becoming a major problem for them in dealing with prisoners that were coming off of these legal highs. How are we managing to address that, and what additional pressure is that putting on resources and personnel for what you would say would be your normal cannabis, normal type drugs that we would expect to see?
Oddly, one of the areas that we're experiencing some of the most challenges is in our mental health inpatient services. There are a number of people that will go in not taking NPS who very quickly after arriving in the Royal Edinburgh do start taking it. So it has become a really significant issue for us in terms of how we manage people's behaviour. They've obviously been admitted to a psychiatric unit because of experiencing significant challenges anyway in terms of their behaviours and how they're managing that. And then the NPS is having a knock-on impact on how that's been managed. So it's a real challenge. It is meaning that our length of stay in the Royal Edinburgh has increased. As we try to manage some of the behaviours and ensure that we can keep people safe to get them back out of hospital as quickly as possible into the community. I think one of the things that we're least certain of is what the long-term impact of some of these drugs are. I think some of the cannabis and things like that, there's been a reasonable amount of research for us to have a sense of what the long-term impacts of that is. Actually, particularly for some of the young people, we've got no real sense of what that impact is going to be in terms of their development and what the impact of that might be in 10, 20 years' time. But there is real concern amongst the psychiatric community, certainly, about what some of those long-term impacts are going to be for us. Not noticing significant impacts in some other areas other than the challenge for staff working with this different kind of area that they've not been familiar with. As I say, other than the psychiatric hospitals at this point in time, we're seeing increased lengths of stay at this point.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on the MPS or legal highs? No. Right. Brian.
Yeah, that's one of the points I was going to talk about, was obviously on the substance misuse and the contributions that were given to Vocal and the Midlothian Drugs and Alcohol project. These contributions were given to them. I can see there's a new support worker, or a 0.5 application, a 0.5 worker. I'm just trying. All this is to deal with the recovery kind of aspects from it. I'm believing. But also, I mean, maybe points have already been made about the proactive stuff on taking away, these substances. When it was voluntary put to shops in Edinburgh to give up their stock, I think they did. Most of them did. Enforcement action was on quite a few of them as such, and I just wondered if we went down the voluntary approach just now, asking them to requesting them officially to give up their stock. The extra worker we've got, or the 0.5 extra worker, the half extra worker. I just want to know the sort of cost implications of this, and how long is it for? Is it as a short-term funding scenario, and also I want to know the financial sort of trends in here. Is this an increasing need for more support? I know a lot of things in social services are demand-led, so is this also sort of being demand-led as a sort of financial kind of question? Thanks.
MELDAP's money, in part because it's Scottish Government grant funded, and we will get that for a period of time. So for the period that we have it, we're committed to supporting the carers role. It has been something that's come up, but obviously we would need to review that depending if there was any change in the settlement that we do receive from the Scottish Government for MELDAP strategic partnership. Within Midlothian element, feeling slightly as I'm in a disco setting here, sorry. In the MELDAP, Midlothian is a more fortunate position in terms of its financial envelope has been robust enough for us to make some of the changes that we've needed to make, although we're aware that we will have to alter the way that we deliver services over the next 2 or 3 years, and that's part about our shift to moving towards a more recovery-focused model. What we don't want to have is people slipping back in and coming back into receiving that high-intensity support when they're really suffering from the addiction of whatever nature that is. So it's around us getting the journey right for people and doing that preventative work, doing that recovery work, so that actually the period of time that people are needing that intensive treatment is lessened as much as possible. Improving the waiting times, improving the times that people can access service is a real priority. So we've been reshaping that while we have, to some extent, a luxury of some funds around that, so that we can get ourselves some robust services moving forward, because we are aware of the challenges that we're facing as we're moving forward into this. But we have up until now been in a relatively fortunate position within our drug and alcohol services, and that shift to a recovery model will hopefully ensure that that sustainability continues moving forward, and that this group is a group that we really can continue to support. But yeah, there is a long-term commitment to the carers role, but as I say, that's Scottish Government money, so if there's any changes in that settlement, we may have to review.
Okay. Brian, you finished? I'll raise it.
I was just trying to get my head around who actually made the decision, to point that extra 0.5 worker. Was it MELDAP, or was it ourselves, or was it just, you say that maybe it's the strategic group? You can just nod your head if it was that. A joint decision. On the living well with cancer, that's in the report in various forms. I just wondering, is there extra stuff we can do on this project work locally? The Midlothian Community Hospital obviously comes to mind, and many of our discussions yesterday was on about reducing our carbon footprint. So never mind the convenience of having it locally. Is there anything that we're actually doing to sort of drive forward more use of Midlothian Community Hospital, and particularly in living well with cancer?
The Living Well with Cancer project is a fairly new project. We've got a newly appointed worker who's looking at that piece of work for us as a project group, which I think, Brian, you've agreed to be part of, and are going to be able to obviously get first-hand information as part of that. I think as that project develops, there may be things that we need to come to you with in terms of how we could develop that more widely. In terms of Midlothian Community Hospital, we are exploring how we can better make use of that resource as part of the integration agenda, and the use of Midlothian Community Hospital is very clearly identified as one of the priorities for us in the new strategic plan that we're looking for health and social care. I think we need to ensure that we get that right, and we do the modelling that we need to get the best use of it. You're right. I mean, I think partly because the Western General Hospital is so far away and such a challenge for people to get to, that we do need to look at that particularly, but what we also need to ensure is that there's such a specialism, there's such a range of equipment within the Western General, that we also want to ensure that people in Midlothian get the best possible treatment. So it's about making use of Midlothian Community Hospital where that makes sense for people, so that they're not needing to travel. But then I think there'll always be a need for some of the treatments and supports that they receive to be continued to be delivered from the Western General Hospital in terms of cancer particularly. But there will be a lot of work that's going on around how we reshape the use of Midlothian Community Hospital to get the best use of that space, and to ensure that we can do as much as possible. And whether that's cancer or other services, that we would look at what outpatient clinics or things like that we could deliver. But what we need to ensure is that we make that the best use for people from Midlothian, because otherwise there's a danger that there would be outpatient clinics, and actually it would be all of the residents from the south of Edinburgh that would use Midlothian Community Hospital for outpatient clinics, which might also be a benefit from them. But we need to be really confident that what we're doing for the changes to Midlothian Community Hospital really benefit the residents of Midlothian.
You mentioned a new Living Well with Cancer project worker. Am I right in presuming that's the current project worker that's funded via Macmillan? Or is this a different worker? Is this a development, a new worker? And yes, I would favour more project work even, at the community hospital. And I think it would be more appropriate to have the Midlothian people maybe talk to there, maybe even better than I talk to here in Dalkeith. But the project work, could actually be based, another co-located up to the site. But that would depend on if what I'm saying is right. If it's a Macmillan's project, and if it's a Macmillan-funded worker within our own social services. And my final point was going to be on the delayed discharge figures in in the papers. And a lot of press and publicity about delayed discharges and about health and integration. How is it working if we're still getting delayed discharges from hospitals? And I can't remember what the press was, but it might be in East Lothian. You know, but how bad is that delayed discharges are still here and still seem to be getting worse in some instances? And I'm wondering about the pressures on seasonal highs as well within this paper, and particularly on that issue.
The cancer support worker is a new one. We do have a Macmillan-funded worker that's part of the welfare rights team that very specifically ensures that people are accessing the right benefits. But this is a new worker that's very much looking at the living well with cancer, and that was part of a successful bid that we'd made to the Scottish Government to get some additional funding around that. So that's a new worker, and awful, although I've met him on a number of occasions, I have completely blanked as to what his name is, which is really... I can share that with you so that you'll have that information. With regard to delayed discharges, within the performance report, we've obviously highlighted that, it's on page 14 of the document, we've highlighted that we're off target, particularly around the people being in hospital for longer than 72 hours. What I would say is that that's an aspirational target that we don't have a legal obligation to meet at this point in time, but we felt it was important that we began to measure our progress against that now, rather than wait until the month before it did become an obligation for us. The 72-hour target is still aspirational at this point in time, and it'll be about 3 years before that comes into place. But actually, we need to be working now to work out how we're going to be able to possibly meet the 72-hour target, and that is going to be a very challenging target. There's no doubt around that. And in part it's challenging less because of the services that are available in the community for somebody to come into, and more around the time it takes for you to have meaningful conversations with individuals and their families about what's going to be appropriate for them in the community. So it is less about the resource element and more about actually you need to make sure that you're moving someone in the right way, and that they're part of that conversation and they're signed up to whatever needs to be happening in the community for them. We did, this was a monthly target, and this was the September figure. We did miss the 2-week target, which is something that we need to do. As you'll see from the current, it said 6 patients, and we were challenging that. There'd been some recording errors, and we were not believing it was. We did still miss the target, but it wasn't with 6 individuals. There are still challenges with meeting the 2-week target that can be around a range of things that's very rarely to do with whether or not we have a resource available for somebody. It can be challenges around that we need to do full aids and adaptations in someone's house, and that's not necessarily around the funding for it, but actually the time it would take you to put a wet floor shower in, or a stair lift, or do a ramp outside someone's house can be difficult. Somebody may need rehousing and will only be able to or willing to accept a house in a particular area, and whilst Kevin and his team work really well with us to get suitable housing, he's not a miracle worker when we're demanding something in a particular area. Sorry, Kevin. But it is around some of those challenges that we often have. Families could be insistent that they will only accept one care home, and if that care home doesn't happen to have vacancies, or the care home says no to that person, then it can be very difficult for us, even if we've offered 3 or 4 other care homes for somebody. So 2 weeks can be quite a difficult and tight time frame for us. I would still say that we are ahead of the rest of Lothians in terms of how we are delivering against the delayed discharge targets. We have a really robust approach to that. So myself and Alistair Short, who's Head of Health, meet on a weekly basis. We look through the list of everybody who is currently in hospital and is classed to be fit to be discharged, and hold people to account in terms of what they're doing to ensure that we get people out and that we meet our targets. And actually, even for those people who are counted as who are not being counted against these figures because they're very complex and we need to go for guardianship, we still put a lot of pressure on staff to make sure that we get people out, because we're very conscious that hospital isn't the right place for the vast majority of people to be. It is when you're very unwell, but for the people that we're talking about, actually being at home or being in a homely environment is more important. So there's a real focus for us in Mid Lothian to make sure that we get that right for people. But the targets that we have are very challenging, and when you're looking at individual circumstances, it can be a very difficult thing for us to do.
Thank you. Russell?
Thanks, Chairman. Alison, going back to substance misuse again, sorry to labour this, but in terms of numbers, what are the numbers like within Mid Lothian of the challenges with regard to substance misuse? And what kind of pattern has that been, say, over the last 5 years? Have we seen a decrease or an increase in the numbers? And secondly, the question regarding, I think you alluded to a former drug addict, sometimes the best person to have to, because they hit it hard. I remember in a previous life when I was chairman of Portobello School Board, that we actually ended up with somebody coming in and going into classrooms to deliver that message, and delivering it in quite a different way perhaps from anybody in this room would deliver it, but was the shock tactics was the way that they approached that. And it's maybe not fair to ask you, Alison, it's maybe more for education, but do we have that kind of facility going on in Midlothian? Because it can help. It's only one of the tools that you need in your army to fight drug misuse. But I just wondered if that was something that we do. On the learning disabilities, you did say that there's a bit of a challenge there with regard to some of the folks that are out there. Why has that changed? Because we had a pretty good record on where we were with those people that need that kind of support. And I just wondered, is it because they're more difficult challenges, or is it just that they're, as they get older, the challenges increase as well with some of those people? Thanks, Chair.
With regard to the substance misuse, I would prefer to get back to you with some of the figures. I wouldn't want to misquote. I mean, I think how we're supporting people, there have been a lot of shifts in how we've been delivering some of our substance misuse services. So actually, some of the increases that we might have seen have been more that it's much easier for people to access our services. We used to have a fairly traditional, it went from your GP, you got a referral, you could wait a long period of time to get seen by somebody and get your access into those services. With the development of the gateway clinics, actually anybody can turn up at a clinic. They've got a leaflet because they met the police the night before, or they were in A&E and were signposted. So it's much easier access for people to get into our services now. So I would want to have a look through the figures, and I can get those to you certainly in terms of that. I might leave it to Grace to answer the question about substance misuse for education and the training. But if I talk about learning disabilities, I think we do still have a good reputation and a good range of services for people with complex and challenging need. Part of the development that we're putting in place is to ensure that we're doing that in a sustainable way as possible, because it can be very expensive to support people and keep them safe and keep the staff safe around that. So part of this model is around ensuring that we've got good sustainable services for people. But I think also we're seeing increasing demographics. So there are more people with very complex and challenging needs. And in part, that's really good. That's a sign that our health service is working really well. There are people who are coming into adult services who would never have been in adult services 10, 15 years ago. And actually, we're doing much better at supporting people with learning disabilities into old age as well. The lifespan and life expectancy of people with learning disabilities was significantly lower at one point, but actually we're doing a fantastic job again of supporting people well into old age. But the knock-on impact of that, particularly around dementia, as dementia is often early onset with people with learning disabilities, and can have a real effect in terms of how we manage some of the individuals that we're working for. So in part, it's not that we're not still doing well, but it's about making future-proofing our services. There's going to be a lot of changes and shifts in terms of the inpatient beds within the Royal Edinburgh for people with learning disabilities, and part of this is ensuring that we've got robust community services to cope with the reduced number of beds within the Royal Edinburgh for people with learning disabilities. So I think it's not that we're not doing well, it's just that we need to make sure that we've got robust services moving forward.
Thanks, Alison. Yeah, Jim.
Aye, Alison. On page 15, the very last item there, it talks about being off target, the number of care homes with video conferencing equipment. See, when you say care homes there, are you talking about our care homes, or are you talking about individuals' homes into which we put kind of, being able to talk to them on, video kind of thing? What is that about?
It is care homes. And in part, this is about putting learning and development opportunities in for staff across all of the care homes, so the private sector and our own. So this means that we can have our advanced nurse practitioner talking about how we maintain good skin conditions for people when we're caring for them in bed, and she can train staff across all 9 of the care homes within Middle Lothian at the same time. So it was about ensuring that it's more of a learning and development tool that we're looking at using within this. So this doesn't mean to say that we won't do stuff in people's home, but this particular target is around particularly ensuring that we can do learning and development in a different way across our care homes. We do have a care home liaison nurse who goes in and out of all of our care homes to deliver that, and this is a way of her hopefully being able to offer training and development in a different kind of way. So yes, it is actually our care homes to do video conferencing.
Right, on the basis that I now understand what it is there, how long has that been delayed? You're talking about it being delayed because of the getting a national framework for the procurement side of things, I presume, sorted out. How long has that been delayed, and does it affect other projects, the procurement delay affect other projects using this technology-enabled care?
It's been delayed for a while. Part of it has been because of security issues. So there were challenges that we were facing around, was it secure for an NHS? And it was needing to convince all of the people within the right IT departments that we weren't discussing individual clients, so there wasn't a risk of, you're slightly shaking your head, I'm not disputing that. But there were challenges that we had to have around some of the fact that we were needing to be clear that we weren't discussing individual clients, individual patients, that this was a generic training opportunity, and needing to put that in. We've needed to do work with a range of different private providers to negotiate some of the costs around that. What seemed like it should be a quite straightforward, there'll be a video conferencing screen put up in each of the training rooms, did appear to be a far more challenging process than I think any of us had expected. We're almost at the end of that. I would think probably just after Christmas we should have it all in place. But it has probably taken the best part of a 12-month period for us to do that, which you would not imagine it should have taken. It hasn't per se held up on anything else as far as I'm aware. It has very much been around this particular issue that we've been facing the challenges, but there's nothing else that has had a significant impact for us, certainly, that we're aware of.
There seem to be 2 issues there. There's the procurement side, the setting up of that type of thing, and then there's the IT. Is that internal IT that the problem was with?
Yes, and NHS IT, because it was NHS staff. Our own IT was for putting the video conferencing within New Buyers and Highbank, and linking that into our systems. So we've found solutions for that. So we've worked alongside IT to get the right solutions in place for that. And there were problems from an NHS perspective as well, as they're the ones that are delivering the significant part of the training.
Our internal IT issues weren't they around whether it was you were going to be discussing private? Was it? Right. There are times that I find the restrictions that IT place on us to be a bit over the top, I have to say. As elected members, we come across it every now and again, but just have to live with it. I would guess that it's maybe less critical than some of the things that you're trying to do, doing it the coalface sort of thing. Interesting.
Okay, thanks. Has anybody got anything else for Alison at this time? Brian?
Just on this last red point, page 18, the training, the number of training and public awareness services. Sessions, sorry. Could you educate me a bit more on what a training session is, and is it different for a public awareness session?
I seem to be missing page 18 in my documents. I just need to check Kevin's.
16, sorry.
16, okay. Learning and development as part of the adult support and protection, it's been some of the direct adult support and protection training at level 1, level 2 that's been, we haven't been able to deliver all of that as the training, the lead officer for training has been on a period of absence. We've found alternative ways of doing that. Colleagues in NHS have supported us really well. We've been ensuring that the online e-learning version of level 1 has been made available for staff, and we have, once we became apparent that the training officer was going to be off for an extended period of time, we've also put other means in place from the team that's been delivering that. So we're about back up to being on target at this point in time, but at that point in time we had slipped in terms of the delivery of some of that learning and development, but I think we're probably back where we need to be at this point in time in terms of having caught up with those learning and development through a range of different means and pulling on resources from health and police and using the e-learning resources.
No, I'm just trying to get my head around the two words there. You know, I understand our training services that we have to do, and you might even elaborate that this may be affected our registration processes for staff. But the public awareness sessions, you know, I mean, is that a different item altogether, public awareness?
I think because the level 1 training is broadened out across to the wider public and the information that goes all around there. So the level 1 training is that broader public awareness. So the level 2 is the more specific for staff that are needing to deal with it. And the level 1 training is that broader for people who may have access to that. So that's what we were meaning in that section.
Okay, listen, I have a couple of things. First one's on the Integrated Joint Board, and it's probably a question, and I'll give an example. I'm not looking for an answer to the example, just as an example. There is a couple of times now where elected members have asked, where, in the Integrated Joint Board, how do they feed into to that? And I'll give the question that was asked to me is, some GPs have started charging, for example, for signing forums, powers of attorney. They're charging £90 to people who are terminally ill, etc. And that. And across the communities, a lot of people are looking at it with a wee bit of revulsion, for want of a better word. Probably not the right word to use, just surprise maybe is the better word. But how would elected members feed that into the joint board to say, well, look, how do we get details like that discussed? Because it's sort of cold-face stuff, and probably the joint board, I would have thought, is just that wee bit, are sitting a wee bit above that. How would elected members feed in, or this council feed into the joint board with concerns it has on any issues?
I'm assuming that in part it would be, I suppose, as the elected members that are part of the IJB would have that direct access to the officers that are also part of that. So obviously Evelyn as Chief Officer, I'm there as Chief Social Work Officer, there's the Clinical Director for GP and the Chief Nurse. So I suppose it would be potentially feeding that in, not necessarily at one of the IJB meetings, but asking for that information to be brought into the IJB for discussion, and whether that be through the strategic planning group or into the IJB. So my guess would be, in the first instance, in much the same way that if it was a council-specific issue as elected members, you would come to us as officers and ask us to feed back with you on that, and if it was requiring something in more detailed discussion, that would come to either a performance review, or it be a members' seminar or something of that nature, that it would be via the officers that are also part of that, so via the chief officers or the other officers on that board to take that issue and ask for either a paper or a discussion or some kind of session to discuss that in more detail.
Okay, that's fine with that. The second question is on the substance misuse, and it's the last time we discussed this and we done the visit to the recovery cafe, the one thing that became patently clear to me, and I think to everybody who was there, was the requirement for evening and especially weekend activities, support, what have you. If you're a recovering alcoholic, for example, in the recovery cafe, it's not just about drugs, it's about alcohol, it's about the rest. The worst time in the world is a Friday and Saturday night when all your pals are heading out to the pub. Even if folk are going to the cinema or going to a restaurant or that, it all runs round like a drink. And it was clearly been said to us there that there was no support at 5 o'clock onwards, and on 5 o'clock or 3 o'clock on a Friday to the Monday morning at the sort of core times that that people felt that there should be support. What are we doing to try and address that? Because I would have seen that critical, especially for alcohol. It certainly would be critical that there's something in place to support folk with alcohol misuse problems a Friday night and a Saturday night. Have we taken any steps since then to sort of look at this and see how we're going to deal with it?
MELDAP had done a big piece of work to look at the recovery was one of the key priorities for us, and as part of that what we funded across East and Midlothian is a development worker to look at working with the recovery communities in both areas to expand and enhance that. One of the challenges we've got with working in people in recovery is that we need to also work at the pace that they can work. So actually we could throw some money at making something a 7-day-a-week service, but actually the reason the recovery services work so well is they've been really led by people in our local community who are in recovery, and what we need to do is develop and build that at a pace that they're able to manage the responsibilities around that and actually have the capacity to do that, because if I just put a support worker in to do that, we would lose some of what the real benefits of the recovery model and the peer-led support kind of offer. So there is a big piece of work that's going on to support both the recovery community within Midlothian and East Lothian to develop what they need to take that further. So as yet we aren't necessarily seeing things on a weekend, but I think there's a real commitment for it, and it's what strengths we need to offer and what skills we need to offer to that recovery community to enable them to take it to that level. So there is still a really strong commitment, but part of what we're doing is working at the pace of that recovery community in Midlothian to make sure that they're doing what they need to in that way.
The development work has been in place now for what, about 4 or 5 months now, and I was just wondering when can we expect to sort of see something coming forward as to what the longer term strategy is. It's okay having that development work. I think we've got that money in place for a year with potentially extending it, I think. But I mean, at some stage the development worker is going to have to come forward with what do we do and it was quite clear for the people in recovery that they felt there was very little support at critical times. So therefore I think it's up on us to ensure that we act on that. So when would we expect to see sort of some recommendations or that coming forward for that development worker?
The first report from them is due at MELDAP strategic group on the 8th of December, so I can certainly share information with you after that. So the development worker is coming with a formal report to the meeting on the 8th of December to give us update in terms of what they've done and what they feel still needs to be done and what assistance they may be requiring from the local areas. So after the 8th of December I can get back to you and let you know what those recommendations are.
That would be helpful. I think other members, if you'd circulate it around to the members, it would be helpful. Alison, the last point I have is in the emerging challenges, and that's the capacity and quality of service. Some of the wording there kind of alarms me, as the longer term viability of service in both care homes and care home services requires a long-term approach to workforce planning and the promotion of social care as a career. What exactly does that mean in that absence? Where do you see the main challenge being here? Is this just about getting folk to come into the service, to get folk trained in the service, or what is the pressure on that?
I think the pressures come from a number of different areas. If we look at our workforce, even if we just look at the Midlothian Council employees as a clear picture, across our care homes and our care at home service we have quite an ageing population of carers. It is a physically very, very demanding job, so there are often health issues that are then associated with doing that. So it's about how we ensure that it becomes an attractive job for people to come into. How we ensure that and actually that's not always to do with the money, often it's to do with the fact that people feel valued in their role, that actually we value the carer staff and what they're doing, and that it's seen as a stepping point, a stepboard onto other things. So it might be whether or not I'm going to go into social work or occupational therapy, whether I'm going to be a manager in those services. So it's how we create the right learning and development opportunities for people, for them to see that this isn't a dead-end job for them, that's at the lowest wages. I mean, obviously we've tried very much to look to ensure that the living wage certainly is paid amongst our contracts externally, and we've been doing work around that, but often it's around And I hope health and social care integration will help with some of that. People seeing real pathways for themselves in terms of what that career development might mean, both in terms of the health roles and social work. Hopefully seeing more of a value onto them as carers. I know that some of our carers don't always feel that they're a respected professional group, that we respect nurses, we respect doctors, we respect social workers, and actually the care staff who are in doing the bulk of the work that's actually really challenging are the ones that we ask less of. So we don't ask them what's happening with Mrs. Smith when actually they're in her house every single day of the week, seeing her, have a different relationship with her than we may have. So actually part of it's around how do we make it an attractive proposition for people going into care, how do we support people once they get into that, and how do we see that this is something that we value as a society. And it's not just us as professionals valuing that, but as a society, how do we value the work that care staff do? Because with an ageing population, with an increasing demand in terms of learning disabilities, actually we require a growing care workforce as well. So it is about how we evidence that value, and some of that's around how the pay and the terms and conditions, but a lot of that is around how we value and offer them opportunities moving forward. But as I say, we've got an ageing workforce, so how do we attract those new people into the caring role?
Okay. Is there any other questions? Alison, I just think I want to sum up on this. Obviously, getting people into the care workforce is going to be really difficult for us, and it's clear for the problems we've had in our care homes that we have serious problems in attracting people and attracting the right people. With the massive overspends we've got in sickness absence and that can't continue to go unchallenged. I think we need to look in depth here to see where our problem is. It would be apt to me not to mention that we're very much aware of the further ongoing problems at one of the care homes now, and I'm not going to ask any questions on that because you'll still be investigating that at the moment. But I think it's critical once you have that this body actually looks at what's going wrong in here, because we've got a massive overspend, we've now got a numerous amount of staff suspended. We need to know what's going wrong here, and I think once you have that, we either need this at the next quarterly meeting or a special meeting to go through what's happening at the care homes to make sure that we have the right support in there to find out if it's financial, is it management, is it training, what is it? But we certainly need to get to the bottom of this, because it seems to be the same sort of care home or care homes and the same kinds of problems that are cropping up, and they've been going for a long time now. Jim?
I think it's important we can wait till the next quarterly meeting for that. I think the next performance meeting, if we can have some information, because at the moment we appear to be going on the basis of what was appearing in an evening news article, talking about a report and things like that, which I think we've not seen, at this stage. So I would rather it was sooner rather than later. I wouldn't want to wait another quarter to have that kind of discussion.
If you have that for us as soon as possible. I mean, I think, to be honest here, I think we're maybe actually going to need to spend some time, whether that's the whole committee or a subcommittee, sitting back down and looking to see what's happening in here. Okay, members okay with that? Okay, Alison, thank you for that. Can we now move on to item 4A2 as Customer and Housing Services? Kevin?
Thank you, Chair. In reflecting on Q2, we've made progress in terms of the circumstances at New Byers Crescent, where members will be aware of the circumstances of the gas emissions into 64 properties of the new build development there, and we have all tenants relocated in Q2. As it's September, all existing families there had been relocated, and we've now moved on to the stage of preparation for demolition and ultimately redevelopment of the site. In terms of customer services, we've had the launch in Q2 of the Customer Hub at Mayfield Library. That's a pilot project for a 12-month period in developing new ways of working and accessing services within localities. And clearly we intend to take the learning of that for developing customer services predominantly across the rest of our libraries. That's not intended to be a standard model. It will be relevant to those localities from the experience of the pilot itself. In terms also of libraries, the bibliotherapy project has been running for over a year since its commencement in June of 2014. that had an evaluation carried out, and the outcomes from that are being demonstrated in terms of the positive outcomes for service providers and service users, and to that extent further funding had been sourced in recognition of those joint aims and objectives between the Council and NHS Lothian to extend as well as continue that service. For community safety, we have similarly in the past year been undertaking the Challenge project, and we've had 6 courses held up towards September of this year. This project aims to divert young people from antisocial behaviour, and again its impacts and outcomes are demonstrated across the behaviours of anxiety, school attendance, bullying and hate crime incidents that have been carried out previously. So again, the benefits of that, which are funded partly through the Army Covenant and community safety funding, have been achieved in this year. For housing services, we've been focusing recently in terms of our prison project, looking ahead to the reducing reoffending agenda, which I'll reference shortly. This is to improve the range of housing options for those prisoners who are being released, or indeed to retain tenancies for those who are incarcerated, where that's feasible relative to a range of the length of sentence and benefit entitlements for the duration of a sentence. We've outlined in terms of the report there the positive outcomes again and the relevant costs for the benefits realisation for the individual, but also in terms of ourselves and other services in the working that we have with Edinburgh Prison. For housing strategy, we're nearing the completion of the McNeill project. That was a project where we engaged with the tenants who live in that area, so it certainly has been one where we can evidence capacity building within the tenants group that we've established there, and co-production in terms of the choices that were given to individual tenants about the environmental changes. The landscaping, as I say, is near completion, but also in terms of the refurbishment of the buildings themselves, which had been completed before last Christmas. In terms of challenges that we anticipate, revenues in terms of the income streams to the Council continue to be challenging. Rental income is reported within the detail here as being off target. It's over our 8% target, at just over 9%. I can say in Q3 that has been an improved position that we'll be able to report to you in due course. Council tax is on target, and again within Q3 is an improved position that we'll report to you in due course. In terms of community safety, work is focused on the disestablishment of the community justice authorities, which is scheduled for 2017. And there's work that's ongoing in terms of the shadow arrangements, with the remit incorporated into the Safer Communities Board, and progress reports are provided there. And indeed, we're scheduling briefings to the administration and opposition groups in coming weeks, relevant to a report that will be going to Council about the anticipated structure for our response to the extended partnership working. And in customer services, it's the continuing work in terms of the digital services, the channel shift, both in terms of welfare reform, but also access to services in general for the Council. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Questions? Jim?
Yeah, it's about the McNeill Terrace project. I note that there's been different approaches in terms of the environmental improvements and getting people's buy-in and work with tenants to make it something that they can, they've got an involvement in to try to, I guess, improve the way the properties are looked after in the longer term. But we've been here before with the Braeside Road and Hillside Crescent flats, similar type of flats in the Gorebridge area. We spent a lot of money doing environmental improvements a number of years ago, and these flats have been problematic since, because it's not just about doing the environmental improvements, it's obviously about who goes in there, what their behaviour is like, how the council manages their behaviour. It's about the council being proactive and, I suppose, reacting quickly to things like sweets being dumped in the stair or in the garden and the common areas and things like that, and removing them right away before it becomes an eyesore. And the place just goes downhill again. What sort of management changes and for that kind of respect are we talking about putting in here to make sure that we don't just go back to how it was before?
Certainly, and we accept all those as valid points, and indeed it is the learning from previous schemes that we've done, both in terms of Braeside, also elsewhere in Mayfield, in terms of the sustainability of that. Because indeed, as you've indicated with previous environmental works, we've gone in, we've done the job, and we've walked away, and we're able to turn that around within 6 months or so. This project at McNeill has taken a duration of 2 years, and we're just coming to the end of that process now. And that was precisely because we engaged the people who lived there. And similarly, there were the same issues in terms of deprivation, in terms of voids, because these were low demand areas, and the environment was quite evident for anybody to see as well in that regard. None of that's evident now, and certainly we have those properties in demand, where there are void properties. We've had people actually asking for those before we've had to get to the stage of putting them for the ready-to-rent properties, which is what we do in other areas, so they're accessible to anybody. But also we've got, as you're asking, housing officer up there on a weekly basis, making sure that's going to plan. Also, in terms of your point about rubbish dumping, and uplifts are also carried out on a weekly basis with our colleagues in terms of commercial operations. And we did establish from the core group who helped us in terms of the choices that were being made for environmentals and the building choices. We've continued that, so there's a bit of self-policing goes on, and as you say, with their involvement, we're hoping that they've got some investment emotionally in the area as well. So early days, but it's proven productive, and we use the counterpoint to that to the other areas, clearly in terms of the change of the structure that we've done through the Housing Service Review with additional housing officers. What we've done is redesignate some roles so that we now have 8 housing officers in comparison to having had 3 in the past, but that's a redistribution of generic roles across the housing services teams themselves, with the expectation and the actual reality that they're out in the areas and are visible out in those areas in terms of policing with a small p, their patches and all the work relative to that. Because the previous model was about specialisms, we had rent arrears being dealt with by one team, antisocial behaviour by another team, and so on. So that they've got a greater reach in terms of their responsibility, and again held to account for what goes on within their patches as well. So it's a change of emphasis and a change of direction in terms of how the staff operate, but equally from the experience at McNeill, it's different about how we work together with the people who are actually living in these localities.
Customer satisfaction, I think, is the kind of headline I'm talking to here. On the feedback I'm getting is in the neighbourhood is our problem part of customer satisfaction. In neighbourhood, I just wonder if you any sort of breakdown on that kind of sort of complaints scenario. I would guess that the complaints will be generally about a particular family or household. Will be the neighbourhood kind of complaint. It'd be nice living here if it wasn't for so and so in the area. But we've seen many things from my estate lads walkabouts and stuff like that, where discarded items are left at stairwells next to houses that are never reported for collection. They're never organised. For the bulky uplifts, and just us being proactive on organising that. We can't wait for an estate-led walkabout every 6 months or every year or whatever, into a particular area. And just if you could break down more on this sort of complaints kind of scenario, is it about these kind of physical things, or is it the neighbourhood complaints more about people? Because there's a lot of stuff in there, but I want to know about sort of proactive sort of management of these complaints. And also just to point on the Mayfield Library Community Hub pilot project, if you want. I'm just thinking, that more confidentiality would be needed for these these pods that we've got up in the library. I don't know if it could be if they could be hooded or some other way, because some people who are going to complain, and they're going to complain about a neighbour or something in the neighbourhood, then they're really looking for some kind of confidential way to do that, so people can identify them as the grass. I'm not any kind of words on it, but is there any plans to get the community contact point in Mayfield more confidential kind of based? As I was just thinking, was there another room just near the library, or that's just not in the middle of the library as such? I don't know if that was a possibility. But welcome the hub, and know it's a good alternative to actually go up to the contact point. So it's a good alternative for many people, particularly people with physical disabilities. To actually be able to get into a nice level access area. But just if you could just concentrate on this customer satisfaction part in your reply to me, please.
Certainly. In terms of customer satisfaction, we carry out a survey biannually with tenants, and indeed we just reported that to Cabinet earlier in terms of the 2014 survey. And predominantly the causes of complaint there were unsurprisingly dog fouling, neighbour nuisance and antisocial behaviour beyond neighbour nuisance relative to noise nuisance as well. So yes, in terms of the response to that was partly, as it indicated, that we changed how the housing officers manage their areas and are allocated across their areas in terms of more generic working rather than the specialist teams, where it gets frustrating for people to be passed on to a different team because it's not within the remit of the individual officer that they're dealing with. So that's no longer the case. So we expect that will certainly improve the next time we carry out the survey. Relative to the issues of dog fouling, obviously that falls to environmental health, but again, they're looking for collaboration with people who are evidencing this is happening or reporting of that, where there's a pattern, whether that's during the school run and the dog's taken along and the like. And I know that there has been in recent years, when I had environmental health, an increase in our activities and fixed penalty notices in comparison with some neighbouring authorities. So work is ongoing in response to that. In terms of noise nuisance and antisocial behaviour, certainly, again, we intervene both in terms of mediation, where there's some misunderstanding between neighbours. We have an early stage of the mediation service, which again has been relatively successful and well regarded, where it has been able to achieve outcomes for people. That escalates clearly then on to enforcement, where we've not been able to change behaviours, because whilst we will manage the properties, we can't always manage the individuals. So if we can't change the behaviours through an escalating and proportionate process of warnings and then notices for enforcement, we move on in terms of decree for eviction and antisocial behaviour orders. And those are deployed, and we also vary people's tenancies in terms of short, secure tenancies, so that they have less rights until such time as they can evidence their change in their behaviours, and we can reinstate them to a full tenancy. And the new legislation for the Housing Act 2014 will allow us to intervene at a much earlier stage in terms of suspensions for people, in terms of their housing expectations, that we wouldn't necessarily have to house people who have got a housing antisocial behaviour history, where currently we still have an obligation legally. So, in terms of the customer satisfaction survey, I can certainly share that with you because it went to Cabinet earlier, and as I say, it outlines those as being the main areas of concern and feedback from individuals, and ultimately what we are doing in response to that, and that's where the change in the housing officer remit has come as a consequence as well. In terms of the Mayfield Library, in terms the range of services have been restricted at this stage because it is a pilot. We're not doing cash transactions, for example. We're not taking inquiries relative to social work, whether that's children, families or adult and social care, precisely for the reasons of privacy and confidentiality. We are taking antisocial behaviour, and I hear what you say in that regard, and that's part of the feedback that we are getting from people who engage with the services, what their experience is. Again, we anticipated that might be problematic, which is why we restricted the services, and equally looked at what the setup would be. We did, for example, consider a glass box type arrangement for that, but we thought that would be more restrictive and it wouldn't be particularly accessible for people too. But absolutely we'll be able to report back on the learning from that process. Equally, I know counsellor surgeries take place in that library, and people are quite clear can be overheard in terms of some of the issues that they raise with their elected members. So of course we'd want to make use of the opportunities that we can utilise there at the Mayfield Library. So yes, we'll take that under advisement for further development of that project itself, about extending the services when we were in a position to do that relative to social work and other confidential matters.
Jim?
Page 33, couple of items there, all to do with supporting young people avoid homelessness, and we're off target with them. I see that they're said to be new for 15-16, but obviously it's something that we've been doing, I think, quite successfully for some time. I remember when we introduced the kind of support services, educating young people, interviewing them, had quite an effect on avoiding them ending up presenting homeless. And I'm just wondering why we're off target with that. Why, you know, we're not meeting what we're looking to do there.
Certainly, in terms of the first measure on that page with the education programme, that's particular to schools, and it varies across the year because obviously it relates to the term time about our access to schools. But as you say, we've been running this for a couple of years and we're always achieving target through the duration of a calendar year. It's just when we get access into schools. But we're covering all the high schools, which we've done over the last 3 years, I think it is now, that we've been running that programme. And we just had the one high school, as is noted in the notes, to try and determine access into that. And as is, again, in the narrative last week in Pennycook, we won't get into until after Christmas, because, again, we've got to work around the curriculum, because that's the priority, and we understand that. But I would give you the reassurance that we do get full coverage of the high schools throughout the course of the year, and that's been the case for the past couple of years. It's just that this point in the year because of term times relative to Easter and summer. In terms of the youth agencies, that's been an improving picture. We've got more access to them now than we have previously, and it's something that we still work to. Our primary focus is the schools, and then we take the opportunities from the youth agencies as they arise. The 15 is in respect of the actual number of agencies that we are aware of, and again the coverage through the course of the year. So it's also making use of the available staff. It's not something that is purely led by the homelessness team, which was the case in the past. We have the housing associations who are also getting engaged in this programme as well. But I don't have the detail of which agencies we don't have set up for that. I'll need to come back to you on that particular detail.
Yeah, I'll go into the debate on ASBOs and you know, just shifting the problem from one area to another isn't a solution, you know, to our customer satisfaction, you know, and it's varying levels at the various areas, I suppose, you know, but there has to be a more robust tackling of antisocial tenants who are blighting, you know, many complaints in many parts of our community, and I'd like to see, you know, more about solving the issues. Some of them mediation doesn't work, you know, and some of them only enforcement action will actually deliver. And I'd like to see more of that in your housing policies. But this is maybe a debate for another day. Can I just go into the point I was going to make here about the improving young people's destinations and the the number of people in workplace experience with the library service. When I was up at Gorebridge Library at my last surgery, I had a parent inquiring about that, particularly for their child. And that surgery in the Gorebridge Library, by the way, was in a dedicated, confidential room at the side there. But I think, I can understand why this should fail, because this is, I think, a good opportunity for many to learn the workplace environment within their library services.
Certainly, if I can pick up on the antisocial point first, I know you don't want to labour that, but on page 18 is our results, which are all on target relative to ABCs, which is before we escalate to ASBOs, and in terms of the breaches of ASBOs, again, we're within target there. I acknowledge that we would also strive to do more in terms of changing behaviours of people relative to their antisocial behaviour, and that's where we do work in partnership with the police and other services through the Community Safety Delivery Group, and indeed also there's an oversight of the antisocial behaviour and violent offender group, so where police are charging somebody for whatever misdemeanour and the person has a council tenancy, we're also running an action in conjunction with that. So we are literally joined up in that process. Within the constraints of the existing legislation, which is based on corroboration and evidence, restricts me in terms of how I can move or evict people as a consequence of that, and it certainly has not been my intention nor our practice to evict somebody for antisocial behaviour and then rehouse them as a consequence of that, other than where they've got dependent children, where I've got a homelessness obligation. Other than that, people are not entertained by us in that regard, and the New Housing Act again will allow us to do that at a much earlier stage than having to get either a decree or an ASBO. The burden of evidence will be at a much more lower level through the course of 2016, once the commencement orders are given for the 2014 Act. So that will assist us. So we have no disagreement on that point whatsoever. In terms of work placements for libraries, those opportunities are always given on a voluntary basis, and indeed we, as is indicated in the narrative, we've extended that to the contact centre, and indeed we do have, I think we've got about 4, at least 3 I've encountered in the past week over in Buccleuch House and the contact centre. So we're increasing those placements, so that will be an improving measure that we can report on as the year progresses.
Thanks, Kevin. Any other questions or comments? Okay, Kevin, just 2, and it's probably on the percentage, it's page 19, I think, and it's a percentage income due to council tax received by the end of the year. It's on target and it's sitting here, but we're still sitting in the fourth quartile, ranked 32 authorities for the income there. Have we set our target high enough to pull us out there when we're on target and yet we're still sitting at the very lowest? Taking in mind that a very small percentage increase there, if you were putting more resources at that, would actually pay for itself. Is there something that we should be looking today to try and move that that figure? As I say, sitting ranked 32 authorities isn't exactly where you would want to be. And the current tenant arrears as a percentage of total, the first one's CORP7 and the next one's HSN1A. There are now 50 single people now getting what's universal credit, and I take it this is where they get paid the rent money direct and we're reliant on them then coming back to us. Do you have the figures out of that 50, whether we're having problems, and what sort of percentage of that 50 are we having problems getting that paid? Because, to be honest, it was one of the things I had a real concern about, when you're suddenly handing people their rent money and telling them to hand you it back, and their council tax money and telling you to hand them it back, that there was going to be a big chunk of them that were just going to say, I'm away to the pub, and no hand you any of it back. So could you give us some idea of how that's working out with the 50 single people?
Yep, certainly. In terms of council tax, the benchmark position is for 13-14. We're considerably better than that in the current year. We're about mid-table. I mean, there's no formal figures until the end of the financial year, but we know in terms of our peers that certainly there's been an improvement, as is indicated there, that we're up 1%. Now, that doesn't, sorry, 0.1%. That doesn't seem significant in itself, but it is relative to, as I say, our peer group across council tax collection, and also I know in the past week we've posted just around £90,000 to council tax accounts which have been received relative to Water Direct. This is money that we collect on behalf of Scottish Water. It's billed out with the council tax, and these are direct deductions that have been made to accounts, as I say, just in the past week that we have received from DWP. So that will make a significant difference because we're only one of 4 authorities who are engaged in that practice at the present time. So that again will improve in terms of subsequent reporting to PRS. In terms of rent, that is off target. Again, as I've indicated, that's about 8.6% as at this morning, so we're getting nearer target in terms of improved collection. Relative to your question about universal credit, we were at this stage, which is November, we were anticipated to have around 74 claimants by now in terms of universal credit, which was from the DWP projections, and we have 55. So there's been a relatively lower uptake on universal credit than was anticipated. And in terms of those 55, 48 of those are receiving, or we're anticipating receipt of, what's called an alternative payment arrangement, which is that we suspect, well, we're judging that these people aren't in a position, because of circumstances, to be able to make their own rent payments. So we're asking for that to be paid to us as the landlord from DWP. I am aware from this week that Melville have 9 in the same position as well. So across Midlothian, that's the position. In terms of the effect on the income stream, we anticipated, as you indicate, that would be problematic where people are receiving their money direct and having to pay it on to the council. But I can assure you that every effort, including making us aware when payment dates are to claimants, is resulting in revenues officers going to those households. It is labour intensive, but it's, as I say, it's not having as great a detrimental effect on the income stream as we'd anticipated, and I think that's reflected in the fact that the position as at this morning is around 8.6%, and we had targeted for 8%, but there's considerable efforts going into to achieve that.
Sorry, Kevin, I must have picked the figures up wrong there. Did you say there was 55 claimants and there was 48 who had required that direct payments for?
That's correct, yes.
I'd probably tell you how it's not as bad if we're requiring direct payments for 48 out of 55. Okay, right, thanks, Kevin. Is there any other questions for Kevin at this time? None. Okay, Kevin, thank you. Okay, can we move on now to item 4B, it's Children's Services. Mary?
Thank you, Chair. Joan Trent can't be here today, but this is the 14th consecutive month that our child protection register has been below the national average, and you know we've concentrated on that over the last few years. So overall, this is a very positive Children's Services report. Child protection remains steady, are looked after accommodated, now below the national average. That's really due to the early intervention work that we're doing, and links very much to the Children's Services Review. So the progress is as set out in the report. In terms of challenges, it relates to questions that were asked earlier about secure care. We have 2 young people in secure care at the moment, and it remains above our average of 1. Just to reiterate to our members, a child in secure care costs us £250,000 a year, minimum. So by the time they ask for extras, if a youngster needs a bit more support or one-to-one support or whatever, you're talking a lot of money for our young people. Managing risk within our communities, our residential units are at capacity, and we need to ensure that we're planning for the future, where young people will be entitled to be in care until the age of 21 and entitled to ask for support and advice up to the age of 25. So we need to look at how we're going to support these young people post-16, post-18, post-21 when they decide if they want to stay in foster care or residential care. In terms of the named person, again, we're on track with that, but again, that's next August, the implementation of the named person. And again, just sickness absence, you know that it's been an issue in many of our services, our care services, and it's about us really tackling that robustly with support from other services. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mary. Questions for Mary? Comments, Jim?
On page 43, item 10, there's a couple of outstanding audit or best value review actions. Do we know what these are? I presume we've done sort of 80%, 80% of them, that it's the more minor of the recommendation.
There's no high outstanding best value audits, outstanding items, and it's just we really need to pull everything together, so that will be in the next report, in the Q3 report. I can get you the information as to what they are.
Any other questions for Mary? Mary, the only one question I would have is in the units. I thought when we replaced Midfield Home with the units that we were building, that we had planned for any increase, and you say that they were at capacity just now. Is there a reason for them? I'm probably asking a stupid question here. There's a reason because they're full. But I mean, is there something that we've missed here when we planned for additional?
No, you haven't missed anything actually. We planned for 3 4-bedded units, which gave us 12 beds. And it was about youngsters having a more home-like environment, although we did have debates about whether young people really had en-suite rooms and things like that in their own homes. But however, we're beyond that now. We have 3 high-quality children's units, and one of our units, if you recall, we spoke about using it to keep youngsters out of the system. So we were actually working with families in the unit, so bringing parents and children together, doing work, but actually keeping them out of the unit. And then in April this year, we had a young person with particular issues. The young person, we couldn't get a placement for him at all, anywhere. So the youngster was actually housed in one of our units, so taking up a 4-bedroom unit, but keeping the youngster safe within the community. So there's been a bit of pressure on the beds there, but again, that will sort itself out. The young person has moved on now, so we'll get back to, because we're reporting on the previous quarter, so we'll not be in the same position. Just as an aside, our residential units completed their review, their staffing review, and we're only 3 months into it. And in the next quarter, there'll be more of a report. But the inspectors were in last week, and we got very positive feedback on the units and the staffing and the way things are going. So John will report on that in the next quarter. So really good news there.
Okay, right. Thank you, Mary. Okay, if we move on to communities and economy, Ian.
Thanks, Chair. You'll see some of the highlights from Q2 are shown at the top of the report, and I can pick up on those as we go. And also you'll see the emerging challenges, which is really the top 10 agenda for communities and economy for this financial year. And again, I'll pick up on some of those as we go through. Picking up on the major items, in terms of economic development, borders, rails open, but of course the work for economic development programme is going to continue. the notion that somehow you build the railway and just wait for the investment to come is not going to happen. We need to go out there and really chase it. There's a blueprint group which still continues, which was set up by the former First Minister somewhat year or so ago. That blueprint group has all the sort of key partners on in terms of the three councils, Scottish Government, Scottish Enterprise, Visit Scotland. If I've missed somebody, I apologise. But that group is still very active, and the chief execs of the three councils sit on that blueprint group. In terms of there's a wide range of activity they're doing, but just in terms of the economic development side, then a tourism development officer has been appointed for the corridor for about an 18-month period, and there's about to be the appointment of an inward investment officer for an 18-month period. Again, for the whole corridor. And that really is to put some beef behind trying to get out there and attract the sort of inward investment, and also to establish the sort of longer-term basis upon which we're able to sort of maximise the benefit of the railway in terms of sites and premises. And at a more local level, we've got our own activity, which is to really set at our stall to make sure we've got the right skills in the economic development team and the right shop window, if you like, for the sites and premises to attract companies. And there already is some interest, and at least in two cases, we're hopeful of attracting people in on the strength of the railway. City Deal is probably the other big item, which, as members will know, it's the 6 councils of South East Scotland getting together to put forward a City Deal proposal for the Edinburgh City region. The primary submission was made in September of this year. There is a leaders and chief execs group which is driving that, and the current responses from both governments, because the applications to both governments, certainly there's been a positive response so far from the Scottish Government. We're awaiting to see what comes out of the Chancellor's statement right now in terms of the Westminster Government's view. But just to summarise, that is a bid for public sector funding to the tune of about £1 billion to try and lever in a further £3.2 billion of private sector investment, and it's built around what they call 21 asks of the government. And that relates to specific asks in relation to infrastructure, skills, knowledge and innovation, housing and culture. And I can always add more to that, but that's in summary where we are. In terms of the programme, if we get a fair wind and a reasonable response from the Westminster Government, the intention is for the City Deal main proposal to go in March of next year. But I think in terms of projects, remember those projects are looking at infrastructure, but also projects which relate to reducing inequalities and reducing deprivation in particular areas of a region. We won't see, I think, those coming on for a number of years because just the lead-in times for those. Strategic Development Plan Main Issues Report went out for public consultation in Q2. That's the second iteration of CES Plan. So the first one is approved and is running. We won't see CES Plan 2 coming into force until 2018, but it is a key stage in the process. What is important is as we move towards the proposed plan stage of that CES Plan MIR, this Council's position is pretty clear. In relation to housing, there is sufficient housing which has been allocated in the existing CES Plan number 1 and taken up in the LDP, the emerging LDP. There is a land supply in Midlothian. There is no basis for additional allocations in Midlothian in CES Plan 2. That's the Council's position that's been put forward, and that's what will be pursued at officer level. There's a report on the local development plan, Midlothian local development plan, that came to last week's planning committee, as members will be aware. We're looking at member seminars in the new year, and because that's setting the position for which the members want to have in relation to the planning authority, in relation to the work which the government reporter will do on the examination into the objections. but the final adoption of the plan is expected later next year. Looking at progress on some of the emerging challenges, just to pick up, the leader bid, I'm glad to say, has now been successful, which is the European money funneled through Scottish Government. So that's the investment programme to support communities in the Tyne-esque area, which is the two council areas of East and Mid Lothian. Over the next 5 years, it's probably a figure of around about £3 million to be dispersed. It's administered, the day-to-day administration in terms of just the secretariat, if you like, is going to be based here in Mid Lothian, externally funded, I would hasten to add. And the actual decisions on the allocation of funding in response to applications is with the local action group, which is primarily has a lay membership on it. So it's no different to what happened in the last leader programme, which finished last year. So this is new leader programme. Pleased to say that we've now got the green light from the Scottish Government. In terms of other things, there was a well-attended community planning day in October out at the not Rosslyn, out at Pentland Science Park, and that was a really a way in which we get that broad-based input from communities and from other community planning partners in terms of what are the sort of priorities looking forward to the next 3 years, which should go into the community planning partnership programme and the Single Mid Lothian plan. And what was interesting was there was almost unanimity that the key area to be targeted over the next 3 years is inequalities, and defining that in more detail, inequalities in health provision and outcomes, inequalities in qualifications and skills, and inequalities in income wage rates. Trading standards, I was going to mention new psychoactive substances, but that was covered earlier in the meeting, so I won't repeat all that. Just to mention that we're moving towards a single co-located service with East Lothian Council. That's not been confirmed as yet, just hasten to add, to make sure, just so you get a correct picture on that. There is a joint liaison group of members of the two councils, which I understand is to meet in December to endorse proposals for a single co-located service here in Mid Lothian of trading standards to cover the two council areas, but that will need, ultimately that will need formal governance. Just a final word about building standards, because they're mentioned in the highlights. It's a service which works under the radar quite a lot. It's not something that comes before members quite a lot, but it is, they're proving, as its name shows, customer excellence is something which they're achieving on a regular basis. They were reviewed on an annual basis, and at last review they received even higher levels of performance rating. So just a word to support them. Otherwise, Chair, happy to pick up on any of the details in the report that members want to cover.
Brian.
Yeah, the first point we pick up was this the time leader funding. You've got it in the emerging challenges. I think it can be moved now out of that, out of the challenges kind of situation. But we've put a successful bid in for that, and you've given us the value of that bid. And I'm just confirming this is for all Mid Lothian wards, because I'm aware previously it was a kind of a link kind of system to the single wards when we had the 18 wards. And a lot of them for North Mid Lothian benefited at that time, but South Mid Lothian seemed to be missed out on some of that kind of stuff. And I'll maybe get offline with you more sort of criteria for that, about if it's match funding and kind of scenarios and what is the full criteria for it. But if you could just confirm just now if that is for the whole of Mid Lothian. A point on Muller Hill, the recycling facility that we've got, the zero waste facility as it's called. The income generation possibilities for that. Can you elaborate me a bit more on if this is a wee cash cow we've got coming, or if it's just maybe a moderate kind of. I don't know if you have any kind of preemptive figures onto that. On the city deal, again, I'm going to need a lot more information on what the city deal and what that includes. I'm aware that others have been awarded other areas, and I'm aware of sort of the infrastructure kind of criteria to these other awards. And I think we're maybe waiting on a decision of it would be the Chancellor in March, is it? Before we actually get word about this, if we're going to be successful. But I don't know the actual makeup of our Midlothian part of the City Deal partnership, and I would like maybe more information on that. And the sort of consultation we've done on it to actually put particular things in. One thing you've not mentioned in the report was the unsuccessful bid for the Arts Centre, the Theatre and Arts Centre, and I think as part of the economy, that's important. And also with that being so close to the Borders Rail Line station at Newton Grange, it's maybe a part of the Borders Rail kind of regeneration kind of questions is or commercial developments that could be deemed as part of that. And I just want, we're obviously looking for other funding options for such a thing, because we've tried 2 years now to get this. The first year it was maybe a rushed bid, I thought, in the July month when a lot of papers had to get put together quite quickly. But when it came around for the following year, I believe that was totally oversubscribed, for the funding source for that. Many authorities bidding for that, and I do believe we had a quality bid, in there, but we were just unfortunate, not to get that. I didn't think it was anything to do with the officers' deliberations on it, but I'll maybe get more information on that again in the near future. But just that's just a few points for you.
Yeah.
Okay, pick up on. Hopefully, don't miss any of those. In terms of Tyne-esque, then more than happy for Councillor Pottinger to have an offline discussion. Probably there's officers in the economic development team who are far more aware of it than I am. So, but I'll make sure they make contact with you. Sorry. Yeah, I'm going to come to that. Yeah. My understanding is, and I've been dealing with this for a while now, is that yes, it is all of Midlothian and all of East Lothian. I'd be astonished if it wasn't, but I will make absolutely sure. So when you do meet up with the team, then I'll make sure that's been covered. But my understanding, yes, it's all of Midlothian. Miller Hill, wait. My apologies, I'm going to sidestep it slightly because I think on income generation it's probably a question which is better directed to Ricky Moffat this afternoon, because in terms of the operational nature of Miller Hill, then that's really one that Ricky's been dealing with. What I would say, what Ricky may talk about this afternoon as well, is the opportunities for heat from waste and district heating schemes and opportunities to I mean, we've got Shawfair on the doorstep there. And I know that I think it's him and Gary Sherritt have been working pretty extensively in relation to the opportunities for that. So my apologies if I sidestep that, but I think you'll get a more fuller answer from Ricky and Gary this afternoon. In terms of City Deal, yeah, I appreciate in the presentation, I only just covered it in very briefly. There's quite a lot to talk about in relation to City Deal. What I would say is this, it's quite clear that there is a recognition across all of the councils that there needs to be a clear parity and equality in how this is dealt with. So in other words, yes, you have two big councils in Fife and Edinburgh, but it is not clearly, it's not the Edinburgh Roadshow, and that's quite clear from the way in which it's being handled. There is a very active group of leaders with the chief executives that meets quite regularly. In fact, they're meeting later this week. There is what they call the directors of the operational group, which I sit on, and they meet fortnightly. We're advised by Ernst & Young, or EY as they now call themselves, on a regular basis. So in terms of the governance of the project, I think that is fairly well assured. The other point to make is that, as is the case with other city deals, it isn't really necessarily a snapshot in time that we get one go at it, and let's say we get a fair view coming from the Chancellor's statement today or from the civil servants on the back of that, and we target, as they are, March for putting in something substantial. It's not then set in stone. In terms of the projects that could come forward, I mean, for example, in the case of the Glasgow City Deal, they're actually rethinking now projects which they'd originally put in. So it's more a question of a sort of not a movable feast, but there is a degree of flexibility in how that happens. So it's not a question of people sort of missing the boat with projects at this stage. It's more a question of securing the approval and the support for the overall asks, as they're called, in relation to infrastructure, in relation to skills, knowledge and innovation, and then using that as a basis upon, yes, to take forward initial projects which are already being identified, but also as a basis for doing more in due course. I hope that's something of an answer on that, but you can come back on that. In terms of the Arts Centre bid at the Mining Museum, yes, I mean, it failed again. And I suppose, I think there's opportunities for looking at this in a different way. The Borders Rail has clearly made a big difference to the opportunities and the potential for the National Mining Museum Scotland. And they're very aware of that. There's a new chief executive come into post in August who is now working with the board. She is going to present her strategy for National Mining Museum at the next board meeting in a couple of weeks' time. And what we're expecting to see is not just a strategy for how the offer of the museum is going to be improved and built upon, but also issues relating, which I think have been a bit sleepy on for a while, no disrespect to anybody, but I think she'll be looking very closely at the land assets and the building assets which the Mining Museum have, and how can that best be used, not just for the Mining Museum, but for the local community and the wider Midlothian community. And I think we need to, possibly set aspirations for an arts centre, whatever, into that sort of context. So I think it's rather a different way of trying to approach this than maybe hitting a head against the brick wall again in terms of a further bid without that sort of mining museum context to it. In terms of commercial developments, I think you picked up in relation to the mining museum. Was that your reference?
I'm aware of the mining museums and their consultation processes that they've started on the old powerhouse, etc. Yeah, but just wondering if this could be taken in to a cocktail funding scenario with some of these other kind of funding agendas.
That's fine. Yes, thanks. There's a number of opportunities. There is as part of the Borders Rail funding, there is the £10 million pot of money which was rebadged for and allocated to the Blueprint Group, effectively, to disperse as they felt fit in relation to projects across the whole of the corridor, effectively Midlothian and Borders are the two council areas where they'd look to do so. I think the strategy for the Mining Museum, when it comes out, will play potentially very well into some sort of bids for that sort of money. It's also the case that it's not out the way that in terms of that strategy we could be looking at potential city deal involvement. Now there's no promises at this stage, but I think to take your point, Councillor Pottinger, where there are opportunities for funding, then let's not fight shy of those. Let's see what opportunities we can do. So I think we may have had a go at the towns, the Regeneration Fund. We failed twice. I think it was a rather broader way of standing back and looking at maybe how we deal with that in a slightly different way. But that's not to deny that there's still a clear interest and view that some sort of performing arts centre should be located in Midlothian.
Russell?
Thanks, Chairman. Just on the Tyne-and-Esk leader, it would be quite helpful if a briefing note could be given to everybody and not just Councillor Pottinger. I think it's important for all of us to get that information, as long as he doesn't mind me jumping on that particular one. What I did want to ask you about is the whole dog fouling problem that we continue to have, not probably just in Midlothian, but throughout society. And it's really about, we've done many things, and we've put resource in there, and we've tried our level best to get things resolved, and it ain't being resolved. Is there any different way of looking at it? Is there any ways that we can really start to address the problem in perhaps a different way? Because clearly the way that we've been going, and I think we've done pretty well in chasing folks, but at the end of the day, it just seems to be coming back. It's one that each and every one of us gets phone calls about or emails about or whatever way the communication is these days. But it's certainly one that, I think we really need to address. And I just wonder, Chairman, through you, if perhaps a report could come back to this committee at the next proper meeting, not the special meeting, just the next proper meeting, to just see if we can have ideas about how we tackle this, because it isn't going to go away, and I just wonder if there's another way of looking at it.
Yeah, Chair, except it's a perennial problem, and it's one that is often high on the list when we go to neighbourhood planning meetings and talk to community groups. In terms of procedural elements, I have actually already been asked to provide or instructed to submit a report to Cabinet, by Cabinet, on this very issue. So it would seem timely that, in terms of the arrangements for reporting, that can be something which could come before this committee as well.
I mean, just before I ask you for any further questions, like Russell, I've got great concerns here. I don't think we're doing well, though. I think we're absolutely doing appallingly. And I think, as well as asking for a report, I think we're now at the state where every quarter we should be asking for detailed amount of man-hours spent in trying to catch people dogfouling, how many fixed penalties are put out, how many warnings are issued. We need to be getting it benchmarked for past years, etc. Since 1999, one of the three highest priorities, and every time we go out and speak to the public, dogfouling features up amongst the highest. And I think this council has failed absolutely abysmally at dealing with that. I think it had 1 year where I, as a Cabinet member, asked for a monthly report. It went up and we started dealing with it and we started handing out plenty penalty notices. And as soon as you took your eye off it, it just dropped away back down again. And I think in the quarterly reporting we would want, I would think members are now looking for a more detailed breakdown on how many man-hours are being spent by the officers on the street dealing with dogfouling, and how many fixed penalty notices are putting out with a benchmark over for the last 5 years sort of thing, just so that we can see where the trend's going, because it's not getting any better. In fact, it might actually be getting worse with continued demands for dogfouling bins in the area. So people are quite happy to use them if they're provided, but it's what to do with the ones that quite simply aren't compliant. Are members okay to ask for that back on a quarterly basis from now on, so that we can monitor that? Okay, is there any other matters for Ian? Ian, if there isn't, I just have sort of one, and it's more on the economic development side. And we've talked an awful lot about the benefits of the Waverley rail line. You can clearly see there's the start of economic growth and things starting to move again. What are we doing as a council? And I'm going to give an example, and I've spoken to you before about it, so hopefully you might have an update. If you take, for example, the Hopefield site in Bonnyrigg, where we've got nearly 1,000 houses, 1,200, 1,300 now, where we've got most of the houses built, there's a massive big economic development site there that I understand transferred to council ownership maybe 6 years ago. I've never seen a for sale sign, a for lease sign. I've seen nothing anywhere. And I think that's the same. We just watched the problems that we had managing to get paperwork done for a unit up at Mayfield for, I think it was a printer that wanted to shift. What are we doing to promote the actual land ownership that we have, and trying to bring businesses in? We've got the houses in Bonnyrigg. We've not had one single job because the site's lying there. Now that site, the roads, the suds ponds, and I think all the services have been in for, I'm going to say at least 5 years, yet nothing seems to have happened. I often see other units that are council owned and landowners owned and economic development sites with council. What are we doing to promote? Now, Ken Estates has sort of moved years, if I'm right, in with Gary, but as economic development head of service, what are we doing to sort of try to attract businesses in and to try and get money in? And especially when I point to these sort of sites here, we've got the houses, it's part of the local development plan, we've provided land for economic development, yet we didn't be seen to do anything whatsoever to promote the use of that.
Yeah, as you say, in terms of the estate strategy, then clearly I know it's something that which Gary Sherritt is working on, and I know he's got quite a proactive approach, and he may well want to touch on that this afternoon. In relation to, I think the Borders Rail is a catalyst for ensuring that, in terms of the economic development side of things, we do have a much more front foot approach to what we're trying to do. So that is why we are going to be, as part of the process of Borders Rail, we're going to be actually identifying the range of sites, or the top range of sites, which are readily available in terms of particularly buildings, but also premises, service premises. We're going to identify those which maybe need more work, and what sort of programme activity should we be looking at in terms to bring those up to the top rank so they are readily available. That includes not just council-owned sites, but also sites which have been allocated in local plans, which are in private hands, but where we don't seem to be seeing very much activity in relation to the owners trying to do anything with them. So what you'll see is a tangible set of documents, and we will be using the website that's already up and running, which is about Borders Rail investment activity in terms of sites across the corridor, to try and ensure we do have that proactive approach. Fitting into that, I would hope, will be a fairly strong approach in relation to this council wanting to market and put forward its own sites. And the one at Bonnyrigg is close enough to the railway to be a classic example of one where we can do that. All I would say just in passing is that although it's lain dormant for quite some time, I know from previous involvement with that site, there was a bit of a wrinkle which took a long time to sort out with Taylor Wimpey in relation to a piece of land where we didn't seem to have title or whatever. But I mean, that's not to excuse the fact that it has lain there for a long time. We did have actually some interest in it back in 2008-9 from a company that was looking to try and take the whole site, but that eventually fell away, sadly.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you. And I'm going to come to the last item for today is education.
Chair, if it's okay, just to say about that change of paper, there's a small error on page page 76. Right, yep, page 76. Sorry? Page hold on just now. Is it page 76? Yes, page 76, EDSP1/1B. And it's really the verbal part around that. Off target, there have been a high number of pupils being excluded at Lawfield Primary School, one more than once. This is actually inaccurate. And this is not about blaming other people. We've got a new performance and planning team in place, and we had a bit of a problem with the education report and things getting pulled through. We thought we had caught everything, and we haven't caught that one. So that's why you've got the change of paper with the accurate wording. John explained to me yesterday it's not as simple as that. So the previous paper's been approved and it will be on the website. So this is really, if you accept this paper, then it would need to revert it back, I think, as John said. But anyway, we can sort out the technicalities, but it's really just to say that we wouldn't want this in the public domain, especially as the head teacher at Lawfield is working incredibly hard. What was that? Yeah. Yeah. But the head teacher is working incredibly hard, and, you know, we just wouldn't want that inaccuracy up there.
Thanks. The Q2 report focuses on early years, also the setting the strategic direction for education, learning and teaching, and also closing the gap, which has been a national initiative. In terms of early years, significant work has been undertaken in terms of the vision around family learning centres in the 3 CPP areas, and I'm also pleased to say that the Scottish Government are particularly interested in this initiative as well, which is really taking off. In terms of the race and attainment and achievement, the setting the strategic direction we've been discussing with all of our head teachers, and that formed part of the National Improvement Framework report that we took to November Council, and it's all about ensuring that we deliver results that are better than our previous best and being committed to continuous improvement. Over the page in terms of learning and teaching, we're really leading the way now in visible learning. In the August in the in-service days, over 520 teachers and learning assistants were trained, so we're unique in terms of the UK in our training on visible learning. We also had that stamp of approval from the General Teaching Council for Scotland, because Ken Muir himself came along to open that training event. And only this week we also had the foundation days, so we're beginning to see significant changes, particularly in our primary schools, over the implementation of visible learning. In terms of high performance, we're stating there that high performance requires every child to succeed, and this links neatly into the government's closing the attainment gap attainment challenge, particularly around SIMD 1 and 2, and we now have the new insight measures, so we're able to drill down by year group and also by areas of multiple deprivation. Through Insight, we have both local and national measures, and I'm bringing an attainment report to Council in December because it's actually quite complex, and Covalent itself can't report on all of the different strands of this. So we've taken some exemplars of the local measures within this report, but it allows us to look by stage S4, S5 and S6 by total tariff points. So not just about the number of qualifications, but the quality of those qualifications themselves. And in terms of S4, we know that we need to drill far deeper into our lowest 20%, but also, more importantly, our middle 60% and also our highest 20% by the end of S4, because those tariff scores show a fall there, and that would be the equivalent of our young people attaining a C at National 5. So that's one course award fewer than the national picture. However, in S5 and S6, it's a different story, because we actually see an improving picture around tariff scores by the end of S5 and by the end of S6. So we're happy with that in terms of the achievement when we get into level 6 qualifications, but we need to focus in on level 4 qualifications. In terms of the emerging challenges and risks, the teacher numbers continues to be a national issue, so it's not a Midlothian specific issue. Improving positive destinations, and that is really about sustaining our good progress within that, and improving our primary school and secondary school attendance along with that, because we said that we wanted to look at the basics about if we improve primary and secondary attendance, we know if we've got the children attending better, they'll be learning better within our schools. We know that reporting on positive destinations has changed to include the participation measures 16 to 19, and that poses a challenge for us moving forward in the short term, particularly around 18 and 19-year-olds. The Education Bill, which is currently going through the second stage, we know from the National Improvement Framework work in that report that went to Council in November that there's a number of challenges around how we will be recording and reporting data, particularly through the broad general education for CFE itself. And finally, one of our other risks and challenges is around the named person, and we're liaising continuously with CMIS in terms of ensuring that that module is well placed for implementation in 2016. Within the reds, within the report, you'll remember at the Q1 reporting, I was saying that we might begin to see some reds because we've really upped the target, and we want to see us beginning to exceed both the national and the virtual comparator, and you'll see some reds there for breadth and depth measures by stage, and that's where we want to keep that high up on our agenda, because we really want to close that attainment gap within each of the levels of qualification at each stage. So it's not just looking about it at the totality of one particular measure. By the end, it's drilling deep into each individual measure, which is what Covalent finds particularly difficult in doing, which is why we're bringing a supplementary report in December.
Thank you. Questions, Kenny?
Just two. On the new paper,
there was slightly higher, but we can't really compare it by quarter because you should be looking at exclusions across a trend of a year. And when we look at the reporting through the ScotExec return, but also the information that Education Scotland holds on us, we should be looking at that as part of cases of exclusion per 1,000 pupils over the course of a year. But we do know that it's not just Lawfield, it's for Midlothian. The last 3 years, the pattern has been lower in higher in Midlothian than nationally. So that is something that we really want to target in on. But there are cases in schools where you might have something particular happen in a school. So you might see in a quarter some exclusions do go up, in the next quarter it actually falls. So it's not technically inaccurate that there was a rise at Lawfield, but just because of that, that doesn't mean that there were no other exclusions in other schools.
So it related to a particular. Okay. And then just on the... Sorry, Chairs. Okay, just to... Yeah. So just on in the kind of main narrative, just in section 1 at the end, on the average tariff scores, the difference between S4 and then the 2 senior years, is that because the only the kind of relatively higher performing students are staying on for 5th and 6th year, so we're losing a lot of the students who in 4th year didn't perform terribly well, and we're kind of losing them to something else? Is that the case?
Well, these measures are the local measures, so they show it by the end of stage. The December report that I bring to Council will be at the very end, and there you will actually see a stark difference. So you're absolutely right in terms of those children from our most deprived areas don't tend to all stay on. So you'll see that when I show you there's an attainment versus deprivation graph, which is really interesting. So we're encouraging our schools to tailor-make the curriculum so that more children stay on until the end of S6. But this particular one related to S4 is an end of S4 measure, and part of that is around the embracing some of the new qualifications that are wider achievement qualifications, which we didn't have ready previously for children to actually sit an accreditation in that. So moving forward, the heads are now building that into their courses. So we should see that end of S4 measure improve through the wider qualifications, which would also include some of the skills for work courses for the first time through Insight. And previously, those vocational courses didn't show up in terms of SCQF qualifications.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? None? Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. And thank you for your attendance. See you back here at 2 o'clock.